Hi YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So, the INR4 GYB. The original firmware was 1.0.7 I believe. And although I've tried replicating the issue that people were getting where the calibration of the gyro failed, and I tried it with the MB4, MB4 Plus, Noble Pro, couldn't get any of mine to fail, but Flysky have identified the issue and we now have a new firmware update. So we've got 1.0.8 and I'm going to take you through and show you how to update this. There's a couple of different ways to do it depending whether you're already bound to your receiver or not. But for this you can use any of the Flysky radios that will work with AFHDS3 and Flysky Assistant V3. So let's bring you in for a close-up look and run you through the ways of getting this to update so you don't get your calibration failed. Right, so first off we've got the MB4 Pro, but you can use any of the radios, and we've got the little USB adapter on the bottom instead of the base battery, but it'll work just fine with the base battery. But if we turn this RC on, you can see we've got it bound. So with the RC on and the transmitter on, if we connect the radio to his computer, we've got Flysky Assistant V3 open, and we can see it detects the firmware of the actual receiver and the firmware of the radio because it's bound. So we can go to bind and force update, and it just runs you through, telling you to make sure it's compatible. And you can just click continue and it'll auto select the correct firmware on the left hand side. And then it basically, because it was already bound to the transmitter, it knows what receiver it is and everything. And if you do want to select a firmware on this, you just select the 108 or 1.0.8. Then it'll come through and say it's detected. So we can go to refresh device and it'll redetect it, and it's bound back up. It's on version 1.8 firmware. Now the other way to do it, so if we power this down, and then on our transmitter, if we go to a different model memory, so that one, so if we change to a different model memory that this is not bound to, so now we're not seen as receiver. So if we refresh it, so if it's a receiver that's not bound to your transmitter at all, you see the receiver slide is blank. So for this, if you've never bound it, we're going to power off the actual receiver itself. Then we're going to press and hold the bind button. We're going to power it on, and you'll see the fast flashing light, which is saying bind mode. So if we keep it held, and then you'll get the forced update mode, which is 3 flashing lights and then a gap. So once we've done this, we can go into force update on the receiver, and basically all it's telling you is this is how we force update the receiver, but because it's not bound to the receiver, it doesn't know what it's connected to. So on here, we're going to have to scroll down to his list on bottom, INR4 GYB. We can click on it. And expand it, and then select our V1.0.8 firmware. And then you can click continue. It'll go ahead and download the firmware for you. And then what this is doing, any receiver that is in forced update mode, this will try and update. So again, you don't have to have your receiver bound. It can be a brand new receiver, or it can be a receiver from a different model memory. Doing it this way, the actual software is just connecting straight through your transmitter to any receiver in forced update mode. So just make sure it's the only receiver that you've got in forced update mode. And then obviously if we want to check and make sure it's updated as software, we can power off. So to make sure our firmware is updated, we're going to go to his receiver, press and hold bind button, put it in bind mode. Then we're going to go to his transmitter, make sure we're on the model memory that we want to bind to, channel number definitions, make sure they're correct. Then we can go to his RX set, into his bind mode, enhanced. Then we bind it. And we need to reverse the steering on this, but that's all bound up. Once it's all bound up, you can hit refresh if it doesn't do it automatically, but then you'll see the actual receiver info as well as your transmitter info. So you can see firmware version 1.8. So it has updated as software. But that's 2 ways of just making sure that your INR4 GYB is on the correct software. And then if we go into our SVC settings, and we should, if we do as neutral calibration,
successful,
we can see that's successful. And then for gyro calibration,
successful,
and we can see it's all calibrated. So we can disconnect from Assistant V3, and then you can set your RC up, or reverse steering, or whatever you need to do, like we do in this one. But yeah, that's just 2 ways. One way with it already being bound, one way if it's not bound, and hopefully that fixes your calibration failed issue. So let's wrap this one up. So there you have it, a couple of different ways, one bound, one not bound, of updating the INR4 GYB. And this software update should fix any of the issues you was having if you were getting calibration failed, trying to calibrate the neutral zone or trying to calibrate the gyro. As I say, I tried everything I could to try and replicate the issue, but couldn't get it. But it's also worth updating the INR4 GYB to latest firmware anyway, as soon as it's out. And I'm pretty sure that next time we get a batch of firmware updates, then this new 108 or 1.8 will be added to the actual transmitters, so you can update it from the transmitters themselves. But thanks again for watching Wtf Rc Cars. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share to friends and family, and catch you guys again in the next one.